-67 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, metal becomes as brittle as glass. Breath turns to ice needles, and survival without shelter lasts 15 minutes at most. It was precisely at this temperature, in the depths of Alaska's brutal winter of '49, that a young woman attempted what even the most desperate inmates considered madness: an escape from a prison they called the Pole of Cold and Despair. 2 months of travel through a white desert where each step could be fatal. Behind her, guards with rifles and bloodhounds. Ahead, 1,200 miles of frozen wilderness. Eleanor Hartwell. For years, that name was whispered only in the barracks of Coldwater. Her story became a legend that even those who witnessed the impossible refused to believe. A fragile 32-year-old woman weighing less than 90 pounds after prison rations accomplished what healthy men could not. She walked from Coldwater to Fairbanks during the harshest time of year, when even locals tried not to leave their homes. Contemporaries recalled that when rumors of this escape began reaching other facilities in the 50s, authorities categorically forbade any discussion of the topic. The precedent was too dangerous, the example too contagious. If she could do it, others might try, and that could not be allowed. But let's start from the very beginning, from the moment an ordinary American schoolteacher became prisoner 456, and then became a woman who challenged the entire system. Eleanor was born in 1917 in a small town outside Portland, Oregon. Her father worked for the railroad, her mother kept house. An ordinary family, like millions of others. In childhood, Ellie, as her loved ones called her, was distinguished by only one unusual trait: stubbornness. Neighbors remembered that if the girl decided something, it was impossible to change her mind. Once, in winter, she sat in the cold on the porch for 3 hours because she'd bet her brother she wouldn't go inside first. Her brother gave up when his fingers began to go numb. Ellie stayed put. Her mother brought her boots and a coat, but couldn't persuade her to come in. She was only 8 years old. In 1937, Eleanor graduated from a teacher's college in Portland. She received an assignment to a school in Anchorage. Many were surprised by such a choice. The young, beautiful, educated woman could have stayed closer to civilization. But Eleanor dreamed of making a real difference. Bringing education to the most remote corners of the country seemed like a true calling to her. She sincerely believed in the ideals they taught in college. She believed that education would change the world. In Anchorage, she met Clayton Hartwell, a young engineer who'd come to help build the new military base. They married 6 months after meeting. Contemporaries described them as an ideal couple, both young, full of enthusiasm, ready to work for their country's good. They had a daughter, Iris. Life seemed to be working out perfectly. The turning point came in 1946. At a parent-teacher meeting, Eleanor allowed herself to question the methods of discipline being proposed by the district superintendent. She said just a few words about how corporal punishment damages children's psyches, that fear isn't the best teacher. Within a week, the first accusation came, then a second, then a third. It turned out her words were interpreted as criticism of American educational values, and therefore of the entire system. During the Red Scare, any criticism could be twisted into evidence of communist sympathies. They arrested her right in her classroom. Students later recounted that Mrs. Hartwell calmly put down her chalk, turned to the class and said, "Remember, 2 + 2 will always equal 4, no matter what they tell you later." Those were her last words to her students. The investigation lasted 4 months. Clayton tried to arrange visits, brought packages, wrote letters to higher authorities. Everything was useless. At a trial that lasted exactly 15 minutes, Eleanor was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for suspected communist agitation and conspiracy. Clayton was arrested a month later as a family member of a suspected subversive. Their 3-year-old daughter was sent to an orphanage. Thus, teacher Eleanor Hartwell became prisoner 456. She remembered the transport to Alaska as an endless nightmare. In a cargo plane meant for 40 people, they transported over 100 women. Many didn't survive the journey. Those who did found themselves in hell, compared to which the county jail seemed like a resort. But this was only the beginning. Alaska. Even the word itself sounded like a sentence in those years. If other federal facilities were laboratories of the system, Alaska became its industrial workshop, a workshop for processing human lives into labor and compliance. The women's prison camp where Eleanor ended up was located 70 miles from Anchorage. Officially, it was called Coldwater Federal Women's Facility, but inmates simply called it the Valley. Death Valley, to be precise. The barracks stood in a depression between mountains where all the cold air accumulated in winter. The temperature here dropped 10 to 15 degrees lower than at the weather station, and the official readings were already extreme. In the barracks where they housed Eleanor, 80 women lived. Bunks in 3 tiers, no mattresses, just boards. Those who didn't get space on the bunks slept on the floor. The stove was lit twice a day, but the heat lasted at most an hour. Women slept dressed, pressed against each other. Those who ended up on the edge often didn't wake up by morning. They froze. They were carried out and stacked behind the barracks like firewood. There was no one to bury them, and no time. Wake up at 5 a.m. Regardless of weather, they were driven out for roll call. They stood for an hour, sometimes 2, while the administration decided who to send where. Women worked alongside men, logging, road construction, mining. Work quotas were calculated for a healthy man, but no one got a pass. Didn't meet the quota? They cut your rations. Cut rations? Not enough strength for work. A vicious circle with only one exit. Eleanor ended up in a logging brigade. Her partner was Florence Ashwood, a former actress from a Chicago theater, an educated woman of about 50 who somehow managed to maintain some semblance of dignity, even here. She taught Eleanor the main rule of survival. Honey, here you need to die inside to survive outside. Stop feeling, stop remembering, stop hoping. Become a function. It's the only way to last. But Eleanor couldn't become a function. Every night she dreamed of her daughter, little Iris, reaching out her arms and calling for Mommy. She'd wake in tears, and those tears would instantly turn to ice on her cheeks. Florence would silently wipe them with the edge of her sleeve and whisper, "Don't cry in front of them. They feed on our tears." They fed once a day, 10 ounces of bread and watery soup from rotten cabbage and frozen potatoes. Sometimes fish heads appeared. That was considered lucky. Women fought over them like animals. At first, Eleanor refused to participate in these fights, but hunger breaks any principles. After a month, she was already pushing others aside to get to the pot first. Water was especially difficult. In winter, they had to get it from snow, but there was nothing to melt it with. Eating snow gave you stomach problems, started dysentery, and going outside with dysentery in the frost was a death sentence. Eleanor watched women literally freeze in their own excrement, unable to make it back to the barracks. The turning point came in November 48. News reached the camp of a new wave of sentences. Now 10-year terms could turn into 25 by simple administrative decision, without a new trial, without the right to appeal. Florence Ashwood, receiving this news, hanged herself that very night with her own scarf. Eleanor found her in the morning. In the woman's fist was clutched a photograph of her son, a small, worn-to-holes picture of a boy about 10 in a sailor suit. It was then that Eleanor understood. If she stayed here, she wouldn't even live to the end of her sentence. And if she did live, she'd come out no longer human. She'd become what the few survivors who made it to release became, empty shells who could never return to normal life. At first, the thought of escape seemed like madness. No one escaped from Alaska. It was an axiom. Where would you run? Thousands of miles of wilderness, freezing temperatures, wild animals all around. The nearest populated area not connected to the prison system was 1,200 miles away. Even if by some miracle you managed to get beyond the fence, you wouldn't last long. No documents, no food, no warm clothes. And most importantly, informants everywhere. In every settlement, every village. They'd catch you, and then execution. If you were lucky, a quick one. But Eleanor began preparing, slowly, carefully, imperceptibly. First, she needed to gain weight. She started trading possessions for food. Her last pair of warm socks for a piece of lard. A gold earring she'd managed to hide during the search for a loaf of bread. She ate at night in small bites so no one would see. Then she began studying the terrain. During logging work, she memorized trails, wind direction, the location of streams. She listened to guards' conversations about weather, about when blizzards were expected. A blizzard was the best time for escape. It covered tracks, confused the dogs. She needed a partner. Couldn't manage alone. Eleanor observed other women, looking for someone she could trust. Her choice fell on Ruth Whitmore, a young farm woman from rural Montana. Ruth had ended up in prison for hiding a sack of grain from government requisitions to feed her 5 children. She was strong, hardy, and most importantly, desperate. When Eleanor cautiously broached the subject of escape, Ruth answered simply, "Better to die free in the wilderness than live as a slave here." They began preparing together. They saved crackers, hiding them in the lining of their quilted jackets. Ruth traded with the criminals for a compass, broken, but the needle still showed direction. Eleanor got bandages and iodine from the nurse in exchange for writing a letter home for her. The nurse was illiterate. The hardest part was getting warm clothing. At the prison, they only issued thin, quilted jackets that you could last in maybe an hour in the frost. They needed real fur coats, boots, fur mittens. And then luck struck. In December, a new transport arrived at the camp. Among the arrivals was the wife of a high-ranking official who'd fallen from favor. She had a whole trunk of belongings with her. Apparently, the convoy hadn't managed to steal everything. The woman died 3 days later from pneumonia. Eleanor and Ruth were first to her bunk. Under the mattress, they found a fur vest and a pair of boots. They hid them under the floorboards in the barracks. The plan was simple and insane at the same time. Wait for a strong blizzard and leave during evening roll call. In a blizzard, visibility drops to a few yards. The guards don't risk going far from the towers. If they were lucky, the escape wouldn't be discovered until morning. By then, they could be 30 to 40 miles away, and after that, wilderness. But everything went wrong. The blizzard came on the night of December 18th. Eleanor woke to the howl of wind and knew this was their chance. She woke Ruth with a touch on the shoulder. Ruth opened her eyes and understood without words. They'd been preparing for this moment for 2 months, had thought through every detail. But now, when it was time to act, both were shaking with fear. At 4 a.m., an hour before wake-up, they began putting on the hidden clothing. Under the prison jacket, the fur vest, double wrappings on their feet and boots, crackers and matches wrapped in cloth hidden under clothes. Ruth sewed the compass into the lining of her mitten. Eleanor took with her the only thing of value, a small pencil stub and a scrap of paper. If they were caught, she wanted to leave her daughter at least a few words. The plan was this. During morning roll call, when everyone lined up in the yard, they would lag behind the column and hide in the latrine. There was a gap under the floor that led to the cesspit. Through it, they could get beyond the barracks territory. Then crawl to the forest edge. In the blizzard, the guards wouldn't see. But they hadn't accounted for one thing. That night, a new security chief arrived at the camp, Captain Harding, a man who, by reputation, could smell an escape a week before the prisoner thought of it themselves. The first thing he did was change the morning roll call procedure. Instead of a general formation, he ordered them brought out by barracks. When the guard entered their barracks half an hour earlier than usual, Eleanor knew their plan had failed. Ruth tried to remove her boots, but it was too late. The guard saw. A shout tore through the morning silence. "Escape! They're preparing to escape!" What happened next, Eleanor remembered as if in a fog. They were dragged to the yard, forced to strip to their underwear in the frost. Harding personally conducted the search. Found everything. Crackers, matches, compass. He was especially interested in the pencil stub. "What were you planning to write, Red? Propaganda leaflets?" he asked, holding the pencil with two fingers like something poisonous. They took Ruth first. Eleanor never saw her again. Later, through the prison grapevine, the system of information transfer between inmates, rumors came that Ruth was shot that same night for attempted armed escape. Armed because they found a shiv on her that, of course, they'd planted during the search. Eleanor faced a different fate: solitary confinement. A stone box 6 feet by 6 feet, no windows, no heat. The floor flooded with water that turned to ice by evening. Fed once every 3 days, a piece of bread and a cup of water. You could only sleep standing, leaning against the wall. If you sat down, you'd freeze to the ice. 10 days. That's how long Eleanor lasted. On the 11th day, they carried her out unconscious. The nurse later said another hour and it would have been too late. Frostbite of extremities, pneumonia, complete exhaustion. But Eleanor survived. Either her body proved stronger than it seemed, or thoughts of her daughter wouldn't let her go. She spent 2 months in the infirmary, or rather, in what was called an infirmary, a barracks with 20 cots for 100 sick people. No medicine, no food either. Those who had the strength to fight survived. Eleanor fought. It was in the infirmary that fate brought Eleanor together with someone who changed everything. Silas Drummond, a former bush pilot, hero of Arctic expeditions whose photographs had been in all the newspapers in the 30s. Now a shell of a man with fingers amputated after frostbite. He'd ended up in prison accused of sabotage. His plane crashed during a test flight, killing the co-pilot. Silas lay on the next cot and was delirious. In his delirium, he spoke of routes, of secret smugglers' trails, of hunters' cabins and native camps. Eleanor listened and memorized every word, every detail. When Silas came to himself, she cared for him, shared her ration, changed his bandages. The old man was touched. In prison, you rarely encountered selfless help. "Why are you doing this, girl?" he asked one day. Eleanor didn't lie. "I want to leave here, no matter what." Silas looked at her for a long time, then said, "You don't leave Alaska. Alaska only releases the dead." "Then I'll be the first living one," she replied. That phrase decided everything. Silas began teaching her, quietly at night when other patients slept. Taught her to navigate by stars. Polaris is always north, even when you don't have a compass. Taught her to recognize animal tracks. Where a moose passes, a human can pass. Taught her to find winter shelters. They're always built near water, door facing south. Taught her to survive. How to make fire without matches. How to build shelter in snow. What bark you can eat when food runs out. But most importantly, he told her about a secret trail, an old route used by gold prospectors before statehood. The trail went around the main roads through passes and valleys. Local natives called it the Spirit Road and tried to avoid it. But for a fugitive, it was the only chance. No checkpoints, no ambushes, only wilderness, cold, and 1,200 miles of trail. "Exit through the North Ridge," Silas whispered, drawing a map with his finger on the blanket. "There's an old mine shaft, abandoned for 10 years. Guards don't go there. Cursed place, they say. In the shaft, turn left. Go about 1,000 feet. You'll come out at a stream. Follow the stream up to the first valley." In February 49, Silas died quietly in his sleep. Eleanor closed his eyes and whispered, "I'll make it, I promise." That same night, she made her final decision. There would be a second escape, and this time, she'd go alone. Preparation took another month. Eleanor was discharged from the infirmary and sent to light work, mending fishing nets. This was luck. Indoor work, near a stove. She could dry crackers, hide them in the folds of the nets. The brigade supervisor, an older criminal named Big Martha, treated political prisoners with condescension. Didn't report when she noticed Eleanor hiding bread, just said, "Watch yourself, don't get caught, or I'll catch hell too." Warm clothing was harder to obtain. After the first escape attempt, Eleanor was kept under special surveillance. But luck helped again. In early March, a fire broke out in the women's barracks. Bunks in the far corner were burning. Someone had been careless with a candle. In the confusion, while everyone ran out dragging their belongings, Eleanor managed to grab someone else's fur coat and boots, hid them in a snowdrift behind the latrine. All that remained was to wait for the right moment. And it came on March 7th, 1949. That day there was a holiday at the prison. A commission was coming from Anchorage. Security was relaxed. Everyone was busy preparing for the visit of higher-ups. And most importantly, a major blizzard was expected. Old-timers, many with native blood, said you could feel such things. And indeed, by evening the sky was covered with leaden clouds. The air became dense, heavy. Eleanor knew this was her last chance. Tomorrow might be too late. She left the barracks at 8 in the evening, officially to the latrine, actually to eternity, or to death. But it no longer mattered. The first steps beyond the zone Eleanor remembered with crystal clarity. Snow crunched under her boots so loudly it seemed the whole camp would wake. But the blizzard was already starting. Wind lifted snow dust, swirled it into funnels. After 15 minutes, visibility dropped to 15 feet. After half an hour, to 6. The mine shaft was where Silas had said, an abandoned entrance blocked with boards. Eleanor squeezed inside. The darkness was absolute. She had to go by feel, keeping one hand on the wall. Left, 1,000 feet. She counted steps, afraid to lose count. 298, 299, 300. Exit. The stream was also in place, covered with ice, but distinguishable by the characteristic depression in the snow. The first night, she walked without stopping. Fear drove her forward, stronger than any taskmaster. Every crack of a branch seemed like a gunshot, every shadow a pursuer. By morning, by her calculations, she'd covered 20 miles, maybe more. In a blizzard, distances are deceptive. She found a fallen spruce with upturned roots, a natural shelter. Crawled under the roots like an animal, ate a handful of crackers, chewed snow. Couldn't sleep, you'd freeze. But exhaustion won out. She dozed off. Woke to silence. The blizzard had ended. That was bad. Now her tracks were visible as plain as day. She needed to keep moving, find streams or a river to throw off pursuit. But first, get her bearings. Eleanor crawled out of the shelter and froze. Around her, as far as the eye could see, stretched white silence. Wilderness covered in snow. No sound, no movement, only her breath turning to vapor. Understand, in that moment, she realized the scale of what she'd undertaken. 1,200 miles of this silence. Alone, without a map, almost without food, in 40 below temperatures. For a modern person, it's hard to imagine. We're used to help always being nearby, phones, rescue services, people. But there, it was only her and endless white emptiness. On the third day of travel, hallucinations began. At first, mild, it seemed someone was walking behind her. She'd turn around. No one. Then stronger. She saw her daughter running through the snow in a summer dress. She'd shout, run toward her, and fall into a snowdrift, embracing emptiness. She understood it was the cold, but couldn't stop it. Food ran out on the 5th day. After that, tree bark, pine needles, buds. Silas had taught her which were edible. Aspen bark was bitter but nutritious. Pine buds gave vitamins. But try chewing frozen bark when your teeth are loose from scurvy and your stomach cramps from hunger. Eleanor chewed, gagged, forced herself to swallow. Survival isn't heroism. It's stubborn, dull refusal to give up. On the 7th day, she stumbled upon an old hunting cabin. A miracle, perhaps, but there are many such shelters in the wilderness. You just need to know where to look. Silas had said, "Look near water on south-facing slopes where the forest is thinner." The cabin was half ruined, the roof caved in, but the stove was intact. And most importantly, there were supplies. Old, maybe 5 years, but supplies. A tin of salt, a bag of flour, even matches in a metal box. Eleanor made fire, the first time in a week. The warmth was such an incredible sensation that she cried. Tears ran down her chapped cheeks, fell on her hands. Her hands. She looked at them and didn't recognize them. Swollen, black from frostbite, with peeling skin, an old woman's hands, though she was only 32. At the camp, they discovered the escape only by morning. The barracks supervisor, making rounds, didn't find Eleanor on her bunk. They raised the alarm. A check showed prisoner F456 had vanished. Harding was furious. A second escape in 3 months was a blow to his reputation. He ordered the entire territory combed. They found tracks at the mine shaft, but the blizzard had covered the trail beyond. They organized pursuit by all the rules. 3 groups of 5 men each with dogs, with guides from the locals. Contemporary said Harding personally led one of the groups, took the best trackers, the best dogs, promised a bonus to whoever found the fugitive first. Alive or dead, it no longer mattered. Here it's important to understand the psychology of that time. Catching a fugitive wasn't just a job duty, it was a matter of honor for the system. If one person could leave, others might try, and that couldn't be allowed. The entire prison system held together on fear of the inevitability of punishment. If that fear cracked, the whole structure might collapse. The dogs picked up the trail on the 3rd day. Harding's group followed the fugitive's route, finding her campsites. Blood on the snow. Apparently she'd injured herself. Scraps of fabric on branches. A place where she'd built a fire. Harding gloated. Won't last long. She's weakened. Another day or 2 and she'll drop dead on her own. But Eleanor didn't drop dead. She learned from the wilderness. Learned to confuse trails. Walked along stream beds, along rocky slopes where wind blew away the snow. Learned to camouflage campsites. No fires during the day, only at night, and then in ravines so the smoke wouldn't be visible. Learned to sense pursuit. When a human is cornered, instincts sharpen. The closest encounter happened on the 10th day. Eleanor stopped at a frozen lake. She needed to make a decision. Go around along the shore or risk going straight across the ice. Going around meant an extra 6 miles, and her strength was running out. Across the ice was fast, but open space, nowhere to hide. She decided to risk it. She'd crossed halfway when she heard a dog bark. Close. She turned. Figures appeared on the shore. 5 men and 2 German shepherds. They saw her. Shouts, whistles. She ran. Where? Nowhere. Ahead was still half a mile of open ice, but stopping meant surrendering, and she didn't know how to surrender. A shot. A bullet whistled overhead. A warning. A second shot. Ice cracked a yard from her. They were shooting not to kill. They wanted to take her alive. Eleanor reached the opposite shore and dove into the forest. Heard trampling, barking, shouts behind her. She zigzagged between trees, pushed through bushes, fell, got up, ran again. And then, a cliff. 50 feet down. A river, unfrozen for some reason, probably warm springs, voices closer behind her. Eleanor didn't think. She jumped. Cold water is a separate kind of hell. Your body seizes with cramps, lungs refuse to breathe. But she surfaced, pulled herself onto the other shore. Her clothes instantly froze, turned into armor, but she couldn't stop. She ran further, crunching with her icy shell. The pursuit fell behind. They didn't dare jump, started looking for a way around. That gave Eleanor a head start of 3, maybe 4 hours. In that time, she needed to find shelter, make fire, dry off, otherwise death from hypothermia. And she found one. A bear den. Empty. The bear had apparently left on some business of its own. She crawled inside, blocked the entrance with branches. The warmth of her own body in an enclosed space saved her. By morning, the pursuit had gone in another direction, lost the trail. Maybe they thought she'd drowned. Maybe the dogs got confused. Eleanor didn't know and didn't want to know. The important thing was she'd slipped away again, but her strength was at its limit. Food had run out, and more than 1,000 miles remained to the goal. 15th day of escape. Eleanor no longer counted miles. She counted steps. 100 steps, rest. Another 100, another. Her body moved by inertia. Consciousness sometimes plunged into darkness, then returned. In one such moment of clarity, she saw smoke. Smoke above the wilderness. This was either salvation or death. Either a hunter's cabin or a guard post. Eleanor froze, trying to figure it out. Her brain worked slowly, thoughts tangled. But there was no choice. She wouldn't survive another night in the forest. She crawled toward the smoke. Yes, crawled. Her legs no longer held her. It turned out to be an Athabascan camp. 3 hide tents, dogs, caribou. A boy about 10 saw her first and shouted something in his language. Adults ran out. An old man in a caribou hide parka, 2 women, a young man with a rifle. They looked at Eleanor like she was a ghost. And no wonder, a creature of indeterminate gender in frozen rags with a face blackened by frostbite crawling through the snow. The old man said something sharply to the young man who lowered his rifle. The women ran to Eleanor, lifted her under the arms, dragged her to a tent. She tried to resist. What if they turn her in? But didn't have strength even for resistance. Inside the tent it was warm. Impossibly, incredibly warm. The women weren't ceremonious. For them, she wasn't a woman, but a freezing being who needed help. They wrapped her in caribou hides, gave her hot broth. Eleanor cried, swallowing this divine liquid. The first hot food in 2 weeks. The old man sat across from her, looked at her for a long time, then said in broken English, "You run. From death place. You run." It wasn't a question. Eleanor nodded. Denying was pointless. Everything was clear from her appearance. The old man was silent, then added, "White bosses came to us. Looked for woman. Looked 3 days ago." Eleanor went cold. 3 days ago. So the pursuit was still on. So they didn't believe she was dead. She tried to stand, had to leave, couldn't put these people at risk, but the old man stopped her with a gesture. "Sit. We don't tell white bosses. We have own law. Come to tent as guest. We don't give up guest." Here's an important point for understanding. The Athabascans, indigenous people of these lands, had complicated relations with the federal government. Formally, they were American citizens, but actually lived by their own laws that were thousands of years old. And one of the main laws was the law of hospitality. To violate it meant to bring the wrath of spirits. Eleanor spent 4 days with the Athabascans. They nursed her like family. A young woman they called Anya treated her frostbite with some smelly ointment made from bear fat and herbs. It worked. The blackened fingers began to pink up. Sensation returned. The old man, they called him Joe, his real name was unpronounceable, told her about the wilderness, about animal behavior, about how to survive a blizzard. "You walked wrong. he said, examining Eleanor's frost-bitten feet. "Along river ice you go. Ice is even, walk easier, and wind covers tracks. But you went through forest, wasted strength." From him, Eleanor also learned terrible news. The pursuit continued, not only for her. 3 more prisoners had escaped after her, inspired by her example. 2 were caught on the first day. The third, a young guy, made it almost to the Athabascan camp. Joe found him a mile from here. Dead. Frozen. "Show you?" the old man asked. Eleanor nodded. They led her to a snow-covered mound, cleared it away. A boy about 20, blond, with fine features. In his pocket they found a note. "Mom, forgive me. I tried." Eleanor stood over the body for a long time, thinking, "This could have been me. This should have been me." On the 5th day, Joe said, "Time to leave. Whites come again, find you. Trouble for us." They gave Eleanor new clothing, a caribou parka, mucklucks, mittens, gave her food, dried meat, flatbread from some kind of flour, a piece of lard, and most importantly, gave her a guide. Joe's youngest son, Johnny, also an anglicized name, was to take her to an old trading post 100 miles away. "No whites there," Joe explained. "Only old Mitch lives. He helps runners. You not first." The farewell was brief. Anya hugged Eleanor, slipped an amulet into her pocket, a wolf's fang on a leather cord. "For strength," she said. Joe just nodded. Eleanor never saw them again. Several years later, she heard rumors that the entire camp was wiped out. Officially, an epidemic. Unofficially, revenge for helping fugitives. Johnny led her for 3 days, silently. He didn't speak English at all, communicated with gestures. They walked at night. During the day, they lay in snow caves that he could build in 15 minutes. He'd dig out a shelter in a snowdrift, insulate it with branches. It turned out almost warm. On the 3rd night, he brought her to a half-ruined cabin by a frozen river, gestured that she should continue alone, and left, disappeared into the darkness. Eleanor pushed the door. Inside it was dark, smelled of mold and something else. Human. She froze. From the darkness came a hoarse voice. "Come in and don't stand in the doorway. You're letting in the cold." She lit a match. The Athabascans had given her a box. In the corner on a bunk sat an old man, ancient as the wilderness itself. Beard to his waist, eyes faded but alive, attentive. This was that very Mitch that Joe had mentioned. "From the prison?" the old man asked. Eleanor nodded. "Which one are you this year? 5th? 6th? I've lost count." He got up, went to the stove, began making fire. "Sit, warm up. You'll tell me when you've thawed." Mitch turned out to be a former convict from the old days, sentenced in 1907 for union organizing. After his release, he didn't return to civilization. He'd grown roots in the wilderness, lived by hunting, fishing, bartering with natives. And since the 30s, he'd been helping fugitives, not from ideological considerations, from human ones. "I've seen how they drive them north," he said. "Transports of thousands. Half don't make it. And those who run, they're either brave or crazy. But a person has the right to try. I give them that chance." Mitch had a whole system. He knew all the fugitives within a 200-mile radius, knew where guard posts were, where you could pass unnoticed, knew guides who, for money or compassion, helped fugitives. But most importantly, he had documents. "Look here." He pulled a stack of papers from a hiding place. Passports, certificates, IDs, all real, just blank. Fill in whoever you want to be. "Where'd you get them?" Eleanor asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Mitch just grinned. "Partisans have their own scores with the government." Eleanor couldn't believe it. a new identity, a new life, the chance to disappear, dissolve, become someone else. Mitch handed her a passport. Choose a name, but don't get fancy, something simple, American, and come up with a simple legend. War evacuee, lost documents during an air raid. There are thousands like that across the country. She became Margaret Sullivan, Maggie, 30 years old, born in Cleveland, husband died in the war, no children. Mitch filled out the documents himself. His handwriting was calligraphic, old school, put stamps on them. Eleanor didn't ask where the stamps came from. 3 days she rested at Mitch's, ate, slept, returned to life. On the 4th day, the old man said, "Time to go. Soon ice break up, rivers open, impossible to cross. To Fairbanks, about 450 miles. You'll go along the river, but not on ice, along the shore, in the forest. Slower, but safer." He gave her a hand-drawn map, but detailed, marked places where she could stop, where friendly people lived, gave her an address in Fairbanks. "Vera Morrison. Say you're from Mitch. She'll help." The parting was touching. The old man hugged her like a daughter. "Go with God. And remember, if they catch you, you don't know me. You came on your own." Eleanor nodded. They both understood. If they took her, Mitch faced execution. At his age, there wouldn't even be a trial. The rest of the journey was strange. After the hell of the first 2 weeks, when each day could be the last, now everything seemed almost easy. Yes, cold. Yes, hungry. Yes, scary. But she had a goal, a route, documents, and most importantly, hope. But the wilderness doesn't forgive overconfidence. On the 25th day of travel, when less than 200 miles remained to Fairbanks, something happened that almost ended the entire escape. Eleanor fell through ice. She was walking along the river's edge. The ice seemed solid, but it was a trap, undermined from below by warm springs, covered with snow on top. A crack, and she was waist-deep in water. Ice water that instantly paralyzes muscles, won't let you breathe. She tried to climb out. Ice broke under her hands. Panic. For the first time in the entire escape, real animal panic. She'd die here in this black water and no one would know. Her daughter would think her mother abandoned her. That thought gave her strength. Eleanor screamed, howled, beat her hands on the ice, and got out. How, she didn't remember herself. Came to on the shore. All her clothing had turned into an icy shell. Fire. She needed fire, otherwise death in 15 minutes. The matches were wet, but Silas had taught her. In the very deepest part of your pocket, there's always a dry spot. One match, just one dry match. Her hands wouldn't obey, were shaking. First attempt, didn't light. Second, wind blew it out. Third, the fire saved her life. She sat wrapped in a semi-dry parka, watching her clothes dry. If the guards came now, she wouldn't even run, had no strength. But the guards didn't come. A fox came instead, red, skinny, with a scraggy tail, sat opposite, looked at the fire. Eleanor threw her a piece of dried meat. The fox grabbed it and ran. An hour later she returned, sat in the same place. So they sat all night. 2 outcasts, warming themselves at one fire. By morning the clothes were dry. Eleanor dressed, put out the fire. The fox still sat, watching. "Thanks for the company," Eleanor said. The fox tilted her head as if understanding, and trotted into the forest. They didn't meet again, but this moment, absurd, impossible moment of unity with a wild animal, Eleanor remembered all her life. To Fairbanks remained 200 miles, 10 days' travel. It seemed within reach, but it was these last miles that nearly proved fatal. The snow began melting, turning the wilderness into an impassable bog. Each step came with difficulty. Feet sank into liquid mush of snow, water, and last year's leaves. In a day, she could barely make 10 miles. But distance wasn't the main problem. The closer to Fairbanks, the more people appeared. Lumberjacks, hunters, geological parties, and among them, the eyes and ears of federal agents. Eleanor knew. One careless look, one extra word, and it was over. Mitch's documents were good, but would they withstand serious scrutiny? The first encounter happened on the third day from where she fell through ice. Eleanor was walking along a forest road when she heard the creak of runners. A dog sled. Nowhere to hide, sparse forest all around. She decided to walk toward them. Running would raise suspicion. 2 people sat on the sled, a native man in traditional clothes and a white man in uniform. Not federal, apparently a regular forest ranger, but who knew? They stopped. The white man jumped off, came closer. Eleanor forced herself to smile. An ordinary traveler, nothing special. "Papers," the ranger held out his hand. Eleanor took out her passport. Her hands didn't tremble. Amazing, considering her heart was pounding so hard it seemed he should hear it. The ranger examined the document for a long time, compared the photo to her face. The photo wasn't hers. Mitch had said all white women look the same in photos. The main thing was the age roughly matched. "Where are you coming from?" the ranger asked. "From Cold Spring Settlement, going to my sister in Fairbanks. She's sick, needs help." The ranger grunted. "Walking through wilderness. Alone. No money for transport, and my sister. She's all I have left after the war." Eleanor lowered her eyes. The native said something in his language. The ranger nodded, returned the documents. "Be careful. Fugitives from the prisons wander around here. Stay on the road. Don't walk at night." They left. Eleanor stood another 5 minutes, unable to move. Her knees were shaking. First check passed. But how many more would there be? On the 5th day, she came to a lumberjack settlement. Going around would add a day's travel. Going through was risk. She decided to risk it. The settlement was quiet, only dogs barking. She walked along the main street, trying to look confident. A woman came out of one house with buckets, looked with curiosity but said nothing. From another house, a man stuck his head out, drunk, judging by his red face, shouted something unintelligible. Eleanor quickened her pace. On the outskirts of the settlement, someone called out to her. She turned. A young guy in a quilted jacket, no hat. "Lady, where you from?" he asked. Eleanor repeated the legend about her sister. The guy nodded. "Still 3-4 days walk to Fairbanks. Want a ride? Truck's going tomorrow." The temptation was great. 3 days walk or a few hours in a truck bed. But Eleanor knew. Any transport meant document checks, questions, risk. "Thanks, son, but I'd rather walk. I'm used to it." The guy shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just watch out. Don't walk at night. Wolves." He left. Eleanor exhaled. Another encounter behind her. Wolves really were there. That same night she heard howling, first distant, then closer. She climbed a tree, an old hunting trick, sat on a branch all night, clinging to the trunk. Below, shadows flickered, eyes glowed. By morning, the wolves left. Eleanor descended. Her legs wouldn't hold her, but she had to keep moving. 7th day. To Fairbanks remained about 30 miles. Strength was running out. The dried meat was eaten, only a little flatbread left. Legs were swollen. Each step was pain. But the worst thing, hallucinations began again. Again she saw her daughter, her husband, Florence. They walked beside her, talked to her. Eleanor answered them aloud, then caught herself. "If anyone sees, they'll think I'm crazy." And then what she later called a miracle happened. A cart appeared on the road. An old native man hauling firewood stopped, looked at Eleanor for a long time, then said in English, "Looking for Vera Morrison? 3rd house from the post office. Say Joe sent you." And and he left without even turning around. How did he know? Who sent him? Eleanor never found out. Maybe Mitch warned him. Maybe there was a network helping fugitives, or maybe he just saw an exhausted woman and took pity. In the wilderness, there are laws of mercy. Vera Morrison turned out to be a plump woman of about 60 with a kind face and quick movements. She opened the door, looked Eleanor over, and without saying a word, pulled her into the house. "From Mitch?" was all she asked. Eleanor nodded. "All clear. You'll go to the bathhouse, then we'll talk." A bathhouse, hot water, soap. Eleanor cried, washing off 2 months of filth, fear, despair. Vera brought clean clothes, a simple but whole dress, underwear, even shoes. "Size seems about right," she said. "You're not the first I've taken in." At dinner, real borscht, potatoes, even a piece of meat, Vera told her story. She'd been the wife of a police chief shot in '37. She herself had narrowly escaped arrest. Friends had warned her. Since then, she'd been helping people like her, victims of the system. "You can't stay in Fairbanks," she said. "Everyone knows everyone here. They'll spot a stranger right away. You'll go to Seattle. I have a niece there. She'll take you in. And from Seattle, wherever you want, Portland, San Francisco, even New York. You'll disappear there." 3 days Eleanor lived at Vera's. She ate, slept, returned to human appearance. On the 4th day, the hostess brought a bus ticket. "You'll go as my niece. I've written you a letter of reference. You're going to relatives for a wedding. On the bus, checks are rare, but if anything, you have all your documents in order." The parting was hard. In these 3 days, Vera had become almost family. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. "Don't thank me. Thank those who brought you here, and thank yourself. Not everyone's capable of what you did." The bus left in the morning. Eleanor stood at the window, watched the shore recede. 2 months of hell were behind her. But she knew real freedom was still far away. She needed to get to a place where no one knew her, find work, build a new life, and most importantly, find her daughter. In Seattle, Vera's niece, a young teacher named Susan, met her like family, got her into a boarding house at a textile factory, helped her find work as a cleaning woman, but with documents, with registration. Eleanor became Margaret Sullivan, Maggie, for good. She didn't talk about the past to anyone, not even Susan, but the past wouldn't let go. At night, she dreamed of the prison, the pursuit, dead faces on bunks. During the day, she flinched at every police whistle. When document checks started at the factory, someone had stolen from the warehouse, Eleanor didn't sleep for 3 nights, ready to run at any moment. And then news came about her daughter. Susan, using her connections, found out that Iris had been adopted by a military family from Denver. The girl was alive, healthy, going to school. But for her, Eleanor was dead. That's what they'd told her at the orphanage. Mom died, Dad too. You're now Catherine Morrison. Eleanor held the certificate and didn't know what to do. Go to Denver, take her daughter back? But what right did she have to destroy the girl's new life? The child had found a family, stability, a future. And what could Eleanor give her? A fugitive convict living under a false name? She wrote a letter, long, painfully choosing words. In the end, wrote simply, "Iris, if you ever read this letter, know that your mother loved you every second. I didn't abandon you. I just couldn't return. Live happily, sweetheart. That's all I ask of God." She didn't send the letter. Hid it in her coat lining. Maybe someday, when times changed, when it would be possible to tell the truth, when her daughter grew up and could understand. Meanwhile, Eleanor lived the life of Margaret Sullivan. Worked, rented a room in a communal apartment, read books in the evenings, sometimes allowed herself to go to the movies, sat in the dark hall and for 2 hours forgot who she was. But coming out onto the street, she again became a fugitive. Forever. Contemporaries said Margaret Sullivan was a strange woman, quiet, unnoticeable, but with such a look, as if she saw something others didn't see, as if she knew something others didn't know. Neighbors tried to set her up with men, still a beautiful woman, hard-working, but she refused. "I was married once," she'd say, looking somewhere into the distance. Spring 1953. The end of McCarthyism, the beginning of change. Eleanor, now for 4 years living as Margaret Sullivan, stood in a crowd listening to news on the radio. People around her cried. She didn't cry, just stood and thought, maybe now everything will change? Maybe it'll be possible to return my name? The first amnesties began several months later. They released criminals, then those convicted on minor charges. Political prisoners mostly stayed in, but rumors spread. They talked about case reviews, about rehabilitation. Eleanor waited and feared at the same time. What if they started looking for those who escaped? What if her escape surfaced? In '56, after revelations about prison abuses, mass rehabilitations began. People returned from prison facilities, gaunt, aged, but alive. Eleanor met one such woman at the market, recognized her by her eyes. Only those who'd been through hell had such eyes. The woman recognized her too. They stood facing each other, silent. Then the woman whispered, "Ellie? Is it you?" Eleanor shook her head. "You're mistaken. My name is Maggie," and quickly walked away. But the past caught up differently. In 1958, an investigator came to Seattle from Washington looking for witnesses in a case about abuse of authority in Alaska prisons. That very Captain Harding was being tried, and among the documents, the case of escaped prisoner 456, Hartwell E., surfaced. The investigator was young, energetic, full of desire to restore justice. He found Margaret Sullivan at the factory. "I need to talk to you," he said. Eleanor went cold. This is it. The end. So many years of hiding. And now... But the investigator didn't arrest her. He led her to an empty office, closed the door and said, "I know who you are. Eleanor Hartwell. Escaped from Coldwater in March 1949. Walked 1,200 miles. Survived." Eleanor was silent. Denying was pointless. He knew everything. "You don't understand," the investigator continued. "I'm not going to arrest you. On the contrary, you're a victim of injustice. Your case has been reviewed. You're fully exonerated." Exonerated. The word sounded so strange. 14 years of life under a false name, fear, loneliness, and now it turned out she was exonerated. Eleanor cried. For the first time in all these years, cried openly, unable to stop. The investigator gave her documents, a certificate of exoneration, restoration of rights, even compensation, laughable money for 14 stolen years. "You can reclaim your name," he said. "Can demand restoration to your job, housing, everything you're entitled to." But Eleanor shook her head. "Eleanor Hartwell died in that wilderness. There's no point resurrecting her." "What about your daughter?" the investigator asked. His face darkened. "Catherine Morrison, medical student in Denver, married, expecting a child. She doesn't know the truth. Her adoptive parents told her biological parents died during the war." Eleanor made the hardest decision of her life. Not to seek out her daughter, not to destroy her world. Let her live with her truth. It's no worse than the real one, just different. In the 60s, Eleanor Margaret moved to a small town outside Portland, got a job as a librarian. Finally, work she loved, with books. She lived quietly, unobtrusively. Neighbors knew her as a nice, lonely woman who helped everyone with advice and action. She especially loved fussing over neighbors' children, taught them to read, told stories, Kids adored Aunt Maggie. She told the truth to only one person, an emergency room doctor who came when she had a heart attack in '72.
Thought she was dying. Wanted at least someone to know. The doctor, a young man, listened with his mouth open.
"This is incredible." "No," Eleanor answered. "It's just life. One of millions." She lived another 15 years, died quietly in her sleep in January 1987. A neighbor found her in the morning. Margaret Sullivan lay in bed with a peaceful face, holding a photograph in her hand, a small, faded picture of a 3-year-old girl in a white dress. When sorting through her belongings, they found a notebook filled with small handwriting, memoirs, everything from arrest to new life. The neighbor wanted to throw it away. Who needs notes from a lonely old woman? But something stopped her. She took it to the local historical society. There, the notebook lay in the archives for another 10 years. Eleanor Hartwell's story might have remained buried in archives forever if not for chance. In 1997, a group of historians working on wrongful imprisonment cases in Alaska stumbled upon the file about prisoner F456's escape. The case itself wasn't unique. There were many escapes. But this, a woman, alone, 1,200 miles in brutal cold. And the main note, in pencil in the margins, "Not found, presumed dead." But in different ink, different handwriting, exonerated posthumously, 1956. The investigator working with these documents in the 90s noticed a discrepancy. If she died in '49, why wasn't the exoneration posthumous in absentia, but personal? He started searching, found a trail in Seattle. Margaret Sullivan, deceased, 1987. Dates matched, age matched, and when they found that very notebook in the Historical Society, everything fell into place. Historians tried to find Eleanor Hartwell's daughter. Catherine Morrison was alive, 73 years old, professor of medicine, distinguished physician. She had her own children, grandchildren. When they showed her her mother's notebook, she was silent for a long time, then said, "I always felt something was wrong with my parents' story. Too few details, too much left unsaid. Now I know the truth." Catherine passed her mother's memoirs to the Historical Society, but on the condition they only be published after her death. She died in 2019, and only then did Eleanor Hartwell's story become public. But it wasn't the only story. After publication, other testimonies began appearing. It turned out Eleanor wasn't the only one who successfully escaped from Alaska. Old-timers in villages told of strange people appearing from the wilderness, exhausted, frostbitten, but stubbornly moving forward. Some were helped, some were turned in. The exact number of successful escapes, no one knows. Those who made it preferred to stay silent. Eleanor's story became a symbol that human will is stronger than any system, that even in the most impossible conditions you can preserve dignity and humanity, that freedom isn't something given, it's something taken. Today, at the site of Coldwater Federal Women's Facility, there's a memorial marker, a small monument with the inscription, "In memory of all who didn't return and those who found strength to leave." Every year, people come here, bring flowers, stand silently, and leave. And somewhere in the wilderness, old-timers say, you can still find traces of old trails, trails where desperate people walked, seeking freedom. Most didn't make it. But some, like Eleanor Hartwell, proved that the impossible is possible. Where do we know this story from? Documents are stored in various archives: the Alaska State Archives, records from civil rights organizations, family archives of descendants. Some names have been changed by descendants to preserve family privacy. The route was reconstructed from indirect evidence and old-timers' accounts. Accuracy of details is impossible to confirm due to the passage of time. Many documents were destroyed over the years. Many witnesses preferred to take their secrets to the grave. But the main story was passed by word of mouth, grew with details, became legend. Where's truth? Where's embellishment? Now it's impossible to tell. And does it need to be? Because even if half the details are later additions, the essence remains. A woman challenged the system and won, albeit at the cost of her entire subsequent life under a false name, but won. This is a story not only about escape, it's a story about the price of freedom, about how sometimes, to remain human, you must do the inhuman. Walk 1,200 miles through frozen hell. Lose everything, name, family, past, and begin again from a blank page with a new name, a new fate. Eleanor Hartwell died as Margaret Sullivan, but her story lives on in archives, in memories, in legends of wilderness settlements, and in the hearts of those who know that freedom is worth any price, even if that price is an entire lifetime.